Hello, good evening from Liverpool. We are live from Anfield on a landmark day in the story of the Hillsborough disaster, as 6 people are charged with criminal offences. This stadium is home to the memorial and eternal flame for the 96 men, women and children who died more than 28 years ago. It's overcast and raining here today, but I think it's fair to say that after so many dark and dismal days, the mood of the Hillsborough families is a lot brighter tonight. They know now that 6 men, 4 of them former police officers, including the match commander David Duckenfield, are to be prosecuted. Here's our Hillsborough correspondent, Andy Bonner.
Who was responsible for Hillsborough? For 28 years, the question has been on the minds of the relatives of the 96 men, women and children who died. Today, they moved a step closer to potentially finding out.
Following these thorough investigations and our careful review of the evidence in accordance with the Code for Crown Prosecutors, I have decided that there is sufficient evidence to charge 6 individuals with criminal offences.
This is a new chapter in the Hillsborough story. This is the first time in nearly 3 decades that anyone has been charged in connection with the disaster by the state. It provides a new focus for the families and for the survivors.
Now we await the results from the long overdue process of accountability. 28 years for justice. Now is a time for accountability.
We move another step forward. There'll be 6 people facing criminal charges who might not have done if we hadn't have been resilient and all stuck together and fought this long fight.
What has been achieved today will change things for the good of this nation, and I think that's the legacy of our 96 that they will have left behind.
It was always going to be a day of mixed emotions for the families, a day of reflection on the past, but also of guarded optimism for the future.
Not to have had our son for 28 years, it has been very, very hard. He would have been 46 this year, like a lot of other people. He was a perfect son in every possible way. He had respect for himself, respect for his mum and dad and for his sister, and he had respect for the general public until they proved otherwise. And that's why we fought Christopher and the other 95 as well.
After a very long inquest, we got the truth, and hopefully now we'll get justice, and hopefully our loved ones can rest in peace. And all those that's been affected by the tragedy will feel it's their justice too.
Those wanting answers soon face disappointment. It's likely this will be the start of a long process, even before any trials are heard. The first defendants will appear before magistrates at the start of August. Andy Bonner,
Well, Andy is here with us now. So, Andy, what does today's announcement mean exactly?
Well, Tony, as I said last night, this is a very separate process from the inquest. You'll remember that they sat for more than 300 days, heard evidence from more than 600 witnesses. But that process was about trying to record who died, when, where and how. Okay. It was not about deciding whether crimes had been committed. But today's announcement is the latest milestone in the process of trying to establish whether anyone was criminally responsible. And
of course, it follows 2 lengthy investigations, doesn't it?
It does, yes. 2 huge operations taking place side by side for the last 4 years since they were set up. One, the IPCC, the Independent Police Complaints Commission, it's their biggest ever probe into police conduct. The other, Operation Resolve, well, frankly, there's never been anything like it in terms of scale and importance. Now, since January, so they've both been looking, of course, at the disaster and the aftermath. And since January, prosecutors have been looking at the evidence, deciding whether to charge 23 suspects over a range of offences. Now, it's important to say that they've had to decide whether there is enough evidence for a realistic prospect of conviction and whether it's in the public interest to prosecute.
OK, and what about the findings then of the inquest jury?
Well, it's important to say that now charges have been brought. What we can say about previous evidence we're restricted on. That's not to say that previous evidence won't be taken into account, but this is very much a new and separate process. It means that events will be questioned and previous findings will need to be re-established.
OK, Andy, thanks very much indeed for that. Thank you. Now, in keeping with those long-running inquiries that Andy has mentioned, it was a lengthy statement issued by the Crown Prosecution Service today. Our correspondent Rob Smith has been examining it in detail, and he has compiled this report.
The officer in charge of the police operation at Hillsborough in 1989 is top of the prosecutor's charged list in 2017. David Duckenfield was match commander. He's charged with manslaughter by gross negligence of 95 people. The death of the 96th victim, Tony Bland, can't be included for legal reasons, as he died in hospital 4 years later. But before Mr. Duckenfield appears in court, a senior judge will need to lift a block on prosecution created after a case brought by the Hillsborough families almost 2 decades ago.
In order to prosecute this matter, the CPS will need to apply to the High Court judge to remove the stay imposed at the end of his 1999 private prosecution. This process will commence shortly.
The highest-ranking former officer charged is Norman Bettison. 28 years ago, a chief inspector in South Yorkshire, later chief constable of Merseyside. He's accused of 4 offences of misconduct in a public office. In a statement, he told us the charge is not in relation to my actions around the time of the disaster, but in relation to comments I made years afterwards. I will vigorously defend my innocence.
Mr. Denton.
At the home of Donald Denton today, ITV News got few words.
I have no comment.
Your solicitors advise you not to speak to us, is that right?
I've made my own mind up. I'm not talking to you because you can't trust anything you say.
Previously a chief superintendent, Mr. Denton is charged with doing acts with intent to pervert the course of justice. Peter Metcalfe, a solicitor for South Yorkshire Police during the first Hillsborough inquest and the Taylor inquiry into the disaster, faces an identical charge. Alan Foster, a former detective chief inspector, is accused in the same way. Mr. Foster said little to our cameras.
Really sorry, I'm afraid I can't speak to you for legal reasons, so that's it.
The safety of the ground itself that day is the focus of what's left on the prosecution list. Graham McCrell was Sheffield Wednesday's company secretary and safety officer. The charges against him are breaching sports ground safety and failing to take reasonable care of others under health and safety legislation.
Criminal proceedings have now commenced.
The Crown Prosecution Service stressed there should be no comments or items shared online by anyone that would risk a fair trial for all 6 men, a trial that could be many months away. Rob Smith, ITV News.
That report from our correspondent Rob Smith. Now, earlier I spoke to Margaret Aspinall from the Hillsborough Family Support Group. I began by asking her exactly how important today has been.
After all of these years, 28 years, it is a landmark day, Tony. You know, the families have been waiting for this day, as I say, for all of them years, and the toll it's took on them. We've lost a lot of good family members along the way who'd have loved to have been here to have heard that news today, 6 of them.
Were there sleepless nights in the run-up to today? I'm guessing there were.
Oh, there must have been a few sleepless nights. Indeed, I had about 2 or 3 sleepless nights thinking of this today. But it was well worth it.
Now, still quite a long way to go though, isn't there? We're only at really the first step, aren't we?
Yes, but when you say the first step, yeah, but when you think of everything that we've gone through for all of the years and all the courts we've been to, the judicial reviews, private prosecutions, you know, all of them different things, and we've always got so far up that mountain, but we hadn't reached the peak. We had a long way to go. I feel now we are touching the peak, and hopefully this is going to be the journey at to the end of Hillsborough.
And can I ask you something else? One day in the future, when it is all done, one day, what will you do then?
What will I do?
Yes.
As an
this
individual.
has taken up so much of your life. What will you do as a person then?
I'll still be fit, hopefully, and able and active, and hopefully do something to help maybe the community. I'd like to do something within the community to help and support anybody who needs any advice. Not that I'm legally advisable really, but I'd do my best to help anybody, but I'd love to work in the community.
Okay. Margaret, once again, thanks very much for talking to us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Margaret Aspinall there, who I spoke to earlier. Now, let's take a brief look at some of today's other headlines.